angels waging war in the unseen realm. Global events fulfilling biblical prophecy. Eternal life. What lies beyond mortality? From analyzing the paranormal from a biblical worldview to the discussion of cutting-edge science and technology, conspiracy, discovery, special investigative reports. Unafraid to explore the challenging issues facing humanity. Welcome to another edition of Skywatch TV. Special Investigative Report.
There is a portal on a sacred mountain in the American Southwest with entities waiting for their opportunity to appear through the portal on the other side. Welcome to Skywatch TV. I'm Derek Gilbert. At least that's what the Native Americans believe. And we'll talk to a couple of authors who you are probably aware of, internationally renowned authors of the books Exo Vaticanus and Petrus Romanus, the Final Pope is Here. Their latest investigation into a really remarkable phenomenon and belief system of the Native Americans has resulted in the forthcoming book, On the Path of the Immortals. I'm talking, of course, about Tom Horn and Chris Putnam. Gentlemen, welcome to Skywatch TV.
Hey, great to be with you again, Derek.
I'm trying to condense all this down into a couple of pithy sentences to open the program to attract the interest of the viewers, and it's difficult to do. There's a lot here, and we'll try to get through as much as we can in the course of this half hour. But first things first, what is it that led you to go back to the site of where you did much of the research for Exo Vaticana, the Mount Graham Observatory in Arizona?
Yeah, well, you know, like we were talking about before the show, the whole thing actually had a kind of preternatural feel to it from the time that Chris Putnam contacted me via email. We didn't even really know each other, asking me if he could use a quote about the Pope that I had written 3 or 4 years earlier and hadn't thought about since. And remember that, and me saying, wow, the timing is incredible, because my son and I had just been in the other room at the same time he was writing the email saying, isn't it strange that nobody has written a thorough examination of the ancient prophecy of the popes. A 900-plus-year-old prophecy is about to come to an end, and no matter what you make of it, you believe in it, you don't believe in it, whatever, it's still, right, it's got historic value. And of course, there also always seemed to be those priests, those cardinals that were putting some kind of stock in it. Even one pope who went out of his way to have a documentary produced to show that he was the fulfillment of his line in the prophecy. So we were just very curious about that, and you know, one thing led to the other. Chris and I decided to work on that book together, and the rest, as they say, is history. It became a best-selling book, but what happened then was, as he and I were doing television, and Chris wound up in some History Channel documentaries, and the world was very intrigued with what we were talking about, but over and over on shows where you could call in and ask questions, people would call in and say, yeah, but what do you make of the Vatican out there now talking so much about aliens and astrobiology, and their leading astronomers are out there saying, I would baptize an alien, and these would be our space brothers. And people were very intrigued with that about 24 or 36 months ago. And we knew that in order to not come across as just a couple of evangelicals, right, who might be taking cheap shots at the church's astronomers, that we really had to go to the horse's mouth, which meant, if possible, we were going to have to go to Mount Graham in Arizona, where a lot of people don't know that the Vatican has an advanced telescope.
That's right.
70 miles from Tucson in Arizona on the top of that mountain. We were going to have to go there and try to interview the Vatican's astronomers, the Jesuits, and see if we could get to the bottom of why they were suddenly talking about all this stuff.
So that produced the book Exo Vaticana, which of course followed up the Petrus Romanus book. What has the Vatican been saying, Chris, about extraterrestrials, and what are they looking for with their observatory at Mount Graham?
Yeah, really interesting. Since Exo Vaticana came out, I cataloged 4 of their astronomers who had mentioned baptizing extraterrestrials, and going back to 1992. And, you know, really kind of an interesting statement. You think maybe it's tongue-in-cheek, they're just joking, whatnot. But then last year, Pope Francis comes out as the first pope to ever mention baptizing an extraterrestrial. And now that one of the leading astronomers of the VORG, the Vatican Observatory Research Group, Guy Consolmagno, is going on a speaking tour to most major universities. The title of his talk, Would You Baptize an Extraterrestrial? Along with a book of the same title. So they're really pushing this idea into the culture that not only do they exist, but apparently they are eligible for baptism.
Now, why are they doing this? I mean, through science fiction movies, the pop culture has been getting this idea that we may be visited at some point. You know, you begin with the UFO phenomenon in the late 1940s and spawned a whole series of science fiction movies. I know our friend Gary Stearman has talked about the day the Earth stood still and the profound impact it had on him and his career, his studies. Why is the Vatican now, at this point in history, being so proactive in addressing the possibility of alien contact?
Well, first of all, just on the surface, you know, they had a lot to apologize about the way they treated some scientists through history who made discoveries, and you know, and so you know, what was it? Some years ago, they published a paper in which they apologized for some of the stuff they had said about Galileo and just things like that. So I think they've been trying to kind of change their persona in the public and make it appear as if they're certainly, you know, more scientific. They're up to date. They're not anti-scientific. So I think there's some of that. Mm-hmm. But I also think that if you go all the way back to what Malachi Martin said about why they're up on that mountain studying deep space, Art Bell asked him that in 1997, and his answer was way more cryptic. It actually implied that they were aware of something that they weren't making public knowledge, in that he said they know what is approaching the Earth and that it will be of the utmost importance in coming years. And you know, he put about a 10-year time frame on that, and almost 10 years to the date, the Vatican calls for an astrobiology study week at the Vatican. They invite astronomers from all over the world. But what was the question they were asking at that study week? It was, what would the impact be given official disclosure or the discovery of advanced extraterrestrial intelligence? What would the impact on faith be, on religion be? And 90 days later, of course, then you had the oldest scientific body in the world, the Royal Academy, coming together in Britain, essentially asking the same questions. And it was actually on the heels of those two meetings that the media was asking, why is the Vatican talking about this? And that's when Jose Funes came out and said, we'll baptize an alien. Now, there's some very interesting stuff that Chris Putnam did a great deal of research into, and it's in the second book, Exo Vaticana, which we wrote after we came down off the top of Mount Graham, that investigates what Funes was saying, what some of these other guys were saying. But you notice that there's been a change. In other words, they started saying, I would baptize an alien. These would be our brethren. Then they ramped it up a little bit, and they said, actually, the heresy would be not to believe in life on other planets because it puts limits on God's creative ability. And then they ratcheted up a little bit more, and they started saying, well, actually, when they come, it's more likely they're going to be baptizing us into their understanding of the gospel instead of us baptizing them, because we know about ourselves that we are fallen, right? And but we don't assume that necessarily about them. And if they're not fallen, then they're closer to God than we are, and they may have a better understanding of and revelation of the gospel. So they're going to be coming here to correct us. And some of their Opus Dei level writers, Father Tanzelaniti, who we quote in our book, talking about how a new source of information impacting the gospel from an extraterrestrial source might be made available in the future. And once it's verified, now how in the world do you verify something from outer space as being okay with God? I'm not sure how that works, but I guess maybe they're closer to God than we are in some ways, right? And it's going to require us to change, he said, maybe everything we have ever thought we've known about the gospel. So to answer your question, why are they out there talking about it? It almost feels as if they think they know something that the rest of us do not know. And that could take you to, Monsignor Corrado Balducci before he died, saying the Vatican knows that not only do they know that the aliens exist, but some of them are already here. They're on Earth, and the Vatican's aware of it. And now keep in mind, he was no Johnny-come-lately. He was an exorcist for the church, and actually he was the Vatican's official spokesperson on the subject of UFOs and aliens. And just before he died, he went on Italian television, which you can watch on YouTube channels. He was in a documentary film saying that they're using their embassies around the world, the Vatican is, to gather intelligence on the alien agenda. And then, of course, that might have been an oops moment because he got sick right after that and died. But so they almost operate as if they think they know something, and maybe they're moving towards a moment in time, official disclosure, right? A moment in time when they're going to make the rest of the world aware of it. Now, before we get off track, though, about how we got on this book, On the Path of the Immortals, we did go to Mount Graham. Chris and I did. Joe Artis went as our cameraman. He was up there, and people can see film of us on YouTube going up and down all these elevators. We did meet with the Vatican's astronomer at VAT. We clumb all over that. We went to the radio telescope, and then the large binocular telescope that's up on the top of that mountain. That's where the Lucifer device is at, right? Which the Vatican, of course, also has access to using.
Right.
But it wasn't until we came off the mountain that we then really understood something that had happened. And that was why the Apache in particular, but other indigenous peoples, had joined environmentalists in Arizona to file a lawsuit in federal court to try to keep the Vatican and NASA from building an observatory on that mountain. Takes it back to your opening comment. Is there a mountain in southeastern Arizona that is a portal? Well, we found out that that's exactly what they believe.
And we're going to talk about that in just a second. But first, we'd like to give you a little taste of what Tom Horn and Chris Putnam found when they went back to the mountain. On the Path of the Immortals is the forthcoming book. Watch this.
Now we're on our way to the petroglyphs. There are some strange images that are there.
Yeah. I saw it with the naked eye. Yeah. Did you see it? The orb. I saw an orb with the naked eye. What is that?
In 2012, they shocked the world when they predicted Pope Benedict's resignation 1 year in advance. In 2013, they uncovered the mysteries of Mount Graham, the Lucifer device, and the Vatican's secret plan for the arrival of an alien savior. For the last 24 months, Tom Horn and Chris Putnam have been working behind the scenes on their most guarded project and greatest discovery yet. Mount Graham in Arizona is said to be a portal, and the Jesuits admit they are monitoring something there that is approaching the Earth. But as the Vatican knows and the authors just uncovered, this mountain is not the only gateway to another dimension. Now, in their new book, On the Path of the Immortals, Tom Horn and Chris Putnam set out with cameras and field investigators to document the most astonishing evidence of those behind the veil. Armed with inside intelligence from the native peoples, they unearth chilling evidence of what the Bible says about sacred locations and the giant beings that await their time from within.
They claimed that they could actually conjure light ships down, UFOs, aliens.
So what would have caused these ancient Pueblo Anasazi Indians to have departed this area with such great haste?
We don't know why they never finished completion of the Sun Temple.
Many of them escaped right through some of these mountains, some of these old Anasazi ruins.
Travel with internationally acclaimed investigative authors of Petrus Romanus and Exo Vaticana to learn the truth behind a secret so fantastic that it took 2 years and thousands of miles of research to document what has been kept hidden from the public by elitists and intellectuals who are planning mankind's assimilation under a coming savior.
Here's the six-toed giant our Indian guide told us about. And there's the fallen reptilian with the halo above his head that came through the portal.
One whom the prophet Daniel foresaw as an alien god. On the Path of the Immortals.
What did they find at the top of the mountain? We're talking to Tom Horn and Chris Putnam, co-authors of the forthcoming book, On the Path of the Immortals. And we left off with the Vatican and its observatory on the top of Mount Graham. And, Chris, the Apache Nation filed a lawsuit to stop the Vatican from building there. Why?
Well, there's a lot of reasons in the press. I mean, one of the things that we made a lot of jokes about was the endangered red squirrel. There's allegedly a red squirrel that lives up there on Mount Graham that doesn't exist anywhere else in the world. Apparently, they spent $70,000 for rope bridges so the squirrels don't get run over as you go up the mountain. It gets to be a little ridiculous, but it's called a sky island ecosystem, that mountain, okay? Meaning you have nothing but desert, scrub brush, cactus, that kind of thing. But as you go up that mountain, it becomes like a plush forest. It's just amazing, the difference. So it's a completely different environment the higher you go. But when you get up there, it's like a different world. It really is. And so the idea that these Native Americans thought this was a sacred site, it's not a stretch at all, because it's just completely different from the rest of the area. And when we got back, Tom got some emails with photos of people who had taken pictures of strange entities that seemed to be coming through this portal on top of Mount Graham.
Well, and we found out that Mount Graham is one of 4 of the most holiest mountains in the world for all American indigenous people. So you have to wonder why the Vatican and NASA would be willing to fight in federal court to build on the top of one of the holiest mountains when there's a lot of other mountains. And I'm sure they could have found the same kind of environmental circumstances and elevation and whatever on some other mountain. Why did they want that one in particular? And the conspiracy red light went off in my head when we were contacted after we got down off of the mountain, and we were told that the main reason they didn't want them up there is because Mount Graham is, for the indigenous people, what we would call in our tongue a stargate. It's a portal. It's a sacred location. There's actually she's a Mayan, I believe, and she is a professor that just put out a book on sky people, and we've been corresponding a little bit with her, and she's very much aware of Mount Graham as a place where the sky people have been moving in and out of our reality since the beginning of time. Well, when we found that out, that was when the light went on. It was like, wait a minute, maybe there's an idea here that is so esoteric, so kind of beyond anything that we had been thinking about up until that point in time, that it puts a whole new spin about why that mountain in particular had to be the one that the Vatican, who obviously also has an interest in mystical things, right? That had to be the place they were going to go.
And also, in Exo Vaticana, you'll find out that there are laws about, building on protected wilderness sites. The U.S. Forestry Service has all kinds of regulations, and you have to go through Congress. You have to go through a process. Well, apparently, the Vatican didn't have to do that. Now, it's really suspicious. Now, I don't have any direct evidence of this, but 6 months after the Pope visited Arizona, Senator John McCain bypassed Congress, bypassed the Forestry Service, and got a special permit to build that observatory with no voting, no oversight.
And reportedly had a very confrontational meeting with a couple of naturalists who were concerned about the impact. And confrontational is a nice way to put it.
Well, and so the thing was, we were ready, though. Our book was heading for the typesetter. It was through editing. I mean, we were finishing up. We didn't have time to do anything more than drop just a few hints in the book Exo Vaticana about what we had just learned. And so since Exo Vaticana came out, the last 2 years, we picked up the research again. We wanted to find out more about what the indigenous people believe, the Apache. It took us back to the ancient Anasazi Indians and what happened to them, and why did these cliffs, well, first of all, why were they even building dwellings on the side of sheer cliffs?
Right, sure.
What were they trying to, protect themselves from? One thing led to the other, and as these shows that we're doing go on, people will learn that Chris just got back from a trip with a crew to Sedona, which is kind of the southern tip of the ancient Anasazi dwelling places, while I went to the Four Corners with a different film crew, and some of the stuff that we found was just extraordinary. This rabbit hole just kind of kept getting deeper and deeper and deeper. And then, of course, what he can tell about is things we didn't expect. We didn't think we'd go where they tell us the portals are and then actually film things that come through portals, but it appears that that did happen and that we caught film of it.
Well, yeah, Chris, talk about that. You went from being a disbeliever in the phenomenon of capturing orbs on film, and that those orbs may have some supernatural significance. What is it that changed your mind?
Well, in the process of researching my book, The Supernatural Worldview, I studied at the Ryan Research Center, which is what's left of the Duke Parapsychology Lab in Durham, North Carolina. And one of the guys I studied with, he says, he gets all these photographs of orbs, the people say are ghosts, and, 90% of them are just dust or, camera anomalies, light reflecting inside of a camera, things like that. So that's pretty much what I thought they were. And then I read about the Bradshaw Ranch right outside of Sedona, which is a famous area known to be a portal. There's several books about that available. So I read those books, and so I said, we're going to go there and check this out. Didn't really expect to see any orbs, but, I thought I would check it out. So the way to verify it's not a camera anomaly is to use multiple cameras.
Right.
Okay, so we had a video camera and real high quality Canon cameras, not cheap cameras, on tripods, so there's no movement, with flash, without flash, with a professional photographer. And we caught orbs flying around without flash on video and still photography at the same time. And didn't expect that at all. And it really did change my mind.
And I watched part of this film, and to me it's strange in that it's almost as if it's alert that you're there. It flies down. It's doing acrobatics above your head, and then it literally goes.
It just kind of fades in and out.
And it just like mist, just going apart, and getting it from two camera angles was what really impressed me, and I was glad they set it up that way. So, what is it is a different kind of a question, but the fact that these locations, Chris got some, they call them geomagnetic maps. And some of the stuff that you had studied before you went there that was talking about these different I'll let you explain it.
Well, John Keel is one of the early, writers about paranormal phenomenon. He wrote Operation Trojan Horse about UFOs, possibly.
The Mothman Prophecies was based on his work, right?
And so John Keel's somebody I studied because he's a critical thinker. He believes in this stuff, but he's not just gullible, right? And one of the things that he had written about, he called them windows instead of portals, but he believed that in every state there were several of these windows that allowed these UFOs and entities to come and go. And he associated it with areas of high magnetic anomaly. And so you can get from the government the geographical map of magnetic anomalies. Well, if you look at it, Sedona, Arizona is probably the most, like on the color scale, it's pink. In our book, it's black and white, so it's not quite as clear, but it was so pink it went off the chart right there in Sedona, right where we were. So it really is a magnetic anomaly area.
So that you have a certain level of kind of scientific evidence that something is different about this area as it might be compared to other areas. And yet this goes all the way back into early American Indian history where they didn't have the kind of tools you would need to monitor magnetic differences in the earth.
And with just a few minutes left, and I think this will probably set up our discussion for our next program, Tom, tell us a little bit about what you learned about the beliefs of the ancient Native Americans from that area, their creation legend and what they believe may have come through back in the day.
Well, first of all, Mount Graham in Arizona, you can read the Apache creation myth yourself online, and they talk about how in the time before time, the Creator came down. Now, their story is interesting, and ufologists love it because they say a giant silvery disc came down over the mountain, right? And in it, they said, set a bearded man. That was the Creator. And they say he began creating all that there was, and he's good, and he's creating all these good things on the earth. Not long after, the portal opens again, and they say another man comes through it, but they say this wasn't really a man. They say he was a dragon. He was a fallen seraphim. He was a reptilian with a halo around his head, is how they depict him in the petroglyphs that we filmed, right? He comes through and he begins deceiving all of the world. Then right after, giants start coming through the portals, giants, and they're flooding out across the Arizona Badlands, right? And they're cannibalizing the Jindupids, the peaceful Indian farmers who run into the clefts of the rocks, and they begin crying out to God to save them, and then God sends a flood that comes over the earth that wipes out all of the giants. So the amazing part about this that we also found redundant was you have a consistent storyline that's being interpreted by different people through their own world views, but all the principles are the same. The creator, the dragon who comes down, the giants. Now, there at Mount Graham, they also talk about, after the giants, between then and now, they talk about these owl-like beings. And when they draw them, they look like they're drawing the alien grays. And they say they're coming in and through those portals, and their medicine men say these are bad medicine to totally be avoided. In fact, where you were at the Superstitious Mountains, that's why they're named that, because that whole area through there was kind of a place where sometimes it was plagued, if you will, with these owl-like people who would come through there, who were to be avoided. But yeah, we found that kind of consistency, and in the next show I can maybe mention what we found when we went into the Four Corners area with a film crew, actually met with the third generation, the Navajo Nation's medicine man, and some of the stuff he told us was very eye-opening. Yeah,
we'll talk about that. We'll also talk about the concept of portals and how we can reconcile this with what we know from Scripture, and whether this is a biblical concept. We'd like to make you aware and make this available to you. Actually, the research that Tom and Chris did for the book, On the Path of the Immortals, call the number on your screen or visit skywatchtv.com for the special On the Path of the Immortals package. Not only will you get this book, but you get the two previous books in the series, which would be Exo Vaticana and Petros Hermanus, The Final Pope is Here. In addition to that, we will add a book that is a great primer, a conservative theological view of the possibility of life in outer space, life in other worlds. The book, What Dwells Beyond by Jeffrey Martis, again, conservative theologically, but very out of the box in terms of its thinking. In addition to the 4 books, 2 DVDs, The Secret Vatican and Alien Antichrist Connection, and the Special Investigative Report for On the Path of the Immortals, all of that together, over a $120 value for just $39.95. Again, available through the telephone number on your screen or at skywatchtv.com. Gentlemen, just about a minute or so left, actually less than a minute. If you had to pick one thing, Chris, I'll throw this to you. What was the most surprising thing that you discovered during the research for the book?
Well, Derek, I would have to say it is the UFO photo that we ended up with. And, it's online now, and people are probably aware of it, but it's a triangle UFO. I don't know what it is. UFO means unidentified, but we didn't even see it. It flew over so quietly that my wife got it by accident. We got home, we're reviewing the photos, and it's just huge triangular craft. It looks like way up in the distance. And so that was just kind of shocking.
We have had it analyzed, so we'll talk about that.
Yeah. With more on the next program. Who are the Immortals and what are they waiting for? For Skywatch TV, I'm Derek Gilbert.